Melbourne.
I wish it was under different circumstances, Michael.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was been happening for years to go on open mic, and I resisted. But it's not about me anyway, Mike. It's about a great mate.
But he will have a big grin on his face looking down today.
I think he'd be very embarrassed.
Well, he would be, but Stuart and I and Stan have been at you for 4 years, badgering you about this. You owe him now.
Yeah, look, I owe him for a lot of things. I owe him for a great friendship, and I'm truly privileged to be counted amongst one of his mates. As I said at the funeral, I'm not sure if I was his best mate, because I think everyone that met him was his best mate, and he made everyone feel that they were his best mate. It was just so easy to get on with Mike, and we loved his company, and probably you and I, as close as anyone in the football world to him.
I spoke beautifully Saturday. It was a really moving tribute on Saturday.
It's pretty easy to speak about Stuart, because he was just a wonderful person.
1973, Viney. Stuart starts his AFL career.
A skinny kid on the wing.
Skinny kid. The only thing you had in common at that point, you were number 2 at the Bulldogs, he had number 2 at Melbourne. What brought you so close? I mean, you're opposition teams, but you became inseparable and best mates. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, it did start, as Todd said, we played Gaelic football in 1978 in Ireland, and just by the luck of the draw, I got to room with him for 3 weeks in Ireland, just about this time it was, October 1978, and our friendship and mateship grew over the years, and through that I got to meet Sheahan and Kim and the family, and it just enhanced my life unbelievably. I was very lucky, Michael. You meet all the family and all the extended family, the in-laws, the Fockers as they became known. And I got to love all of them. They're fantastic people, and it just enriched my life so much.
You did say Saturday you changed your life, didn't you?
It changed my life, yeah, so much for the better. And we've all had difficult times in our life, Michael, and I had some pretty dark times there when I lost my daughter, and he probably got me back as much as anyone, into the swing of things again.
Yeah, I agree with that. Having seen that from the outside, I think that's true.
Yeah.
We were talking the other weekend about where he sits in the football pantheon. I mean, it's acknowledged as the world's greatest light because no one could find fault with him, and no one ever looked for fault with him. Robbie Flower, the footballer, as you saw him from an opposition perspective.
Look, he did the best player Melbourne I've seen over the last 50 years, Michael, without a doubt. He just had that, everyone said it, he's had the silky skills and what he could do on a football field, no one else could do. He was just an amazing player and just so much respected by the members of the opposition. And he played in an era when there was a fair few snipers around Macca. And if they could stop Robbie Flower, they could probably have a very good chance of winning.
My memory's been that even as tough as league football was in that period, even the thugs didn't go looking for Tulip. There was almost this reverence for him that you didn't just take him out.
There's one bloke got him one day, Tom. He's still in the football world at this stage, Michael. You can work out who it is, I won't say. But I think it was like Dipper said in that that game out at Waverley when Hawthorn were playing Melbourne, and Buckenara kicked that goal after the, which he was.
You don't need to bring that up, Ern, thanks.
It would have been unfortunately because Philip had done his collarbone anyway, so he would have been very unlikely to play the next week in the grand final. But Dipper said, I felt bad after that. He said it was almost like shooting Bandy. I said, well, Nicky, you don't have to worry about it because he's bloody selfish at that stage. He should have given it off well before that. I kept telling Philip, mate, you're bloody selfish, Philip.
What about the game when Quinlan Fitzroy played Flowers Melbourne, Waverley?
Oh, yes.
The margin was 190 points.
190
Any bragging rights were you there, Ben?
Yes, I did bring it up with Philip a couple of times. He did point out that he wasn't playing that day. But he said he was amazed to tell me that he played next week and Melbourne won.
Well, the funny thing about his playing record, and I think we all know that there weren't as many wins as there should have been at that time. I think there was 80 odd out of 272 games. His first 2 games were wins.
Yeah.
That's what Edward thinks.
Yeah, that's been easy.
Yeah.
And such was his rise through the ranks, Mike, that the captain at the time, when he played his first game, had to go around and introduce Shield to the rest of his teammates because he came up through the fourth, the thirds and the seconds so quickly. He was an amazing player, an amazing person. Look, you know, you said you loved him. I loved him, but you know, we didn't have exclusive rights to him. Everybody who knew Robbie Flower loved him. He was just, as Gary Wilson said to me the other day at the fleet, he said he was just such a likeable person, and he was.
Down at Sereno, you and Stan and Tom, and it's the confessional. It's a bit of red wine. Did Short ever bag anyone? Did you ever say anything negative about anyone or bag anyone?
I can't remember him saying anything bad about anyone, Short. I don't think he had a bad bone in his body, Short. And if he didn't like someone, there was a very good reason why he didn't like them. They must have been terrible persons if Short didn't like them.
What about that house? It was like there was a neon sign above it that said, "Well,
I
love."
wasn't loved again.
It took you an hour to find it, but once you loved it,
I've got some of my best memories down there with Short getting the music going and away he goes.
good dancer with me.
Oh, great dancer. Away he goes. Never seen any dancing like We've got so many good memories of Short. He's just a wonderful person. He's my hero. I wish I could have played football like Robbie Flower. He was a fantastic player, but he's my hero as a person.
The golf trip, November is golf week.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult for you this year, isn't it?
Well, everything's going to be difficult without him because he was such a big part of everybody's lives. Stan and Tommy, and we were a team. Every Saturday we'd be playing golf down to the National. We'll try to fill the void for as best we can, Tommy, but I know it's going to be little that we can do, but he was really good mates with Tommy and Jimmy. He was so good that last year we had 4 weeks in America. We went to Hawaii for Kay's birthday and then continued on over to New York and a few other places. And Philip did all the organisation, and it was so good that he was able to catch up with Jimmy. We came down to San Diego, drove down from LA to San Diego.
You knew Jimmy first.
I knew Jimmy, yeah, we played tennis years ago. Before I met you, we played at Morrison Tennis Club before that, so I've got a terrific affiliation with the Flower family, and it's just a great family, great story.
We had some good games on the tennis court, didn't
We did, yeah. I was his partner in the tennis as well.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to miss him as a partner in the tennis, the golf. He's my date for the Brownlow the last 2 years.
Actually, I thought I was your day at their wedding, actually. But you
Oh,
told
yeah,
me.
he'll remember his bad one. He'll get him on. No, yeah, so one of the Brownlows I took him to, and someone said, "Oh, who are you here with?" I said, "Oh, I'm here with Shield here." He said, "Oh, you're betting him up your average, aren't you?"
I think people wanted to know what he was doing there. And the thing that I loved about Robbie the footballer was that he had that childlike passion for the game, even in his last years. He never lost that thing about the enthusiasm to play it, to play well and to win.
No, he had a competitive edge, didn't he, Mike? Whatever he did, he was so competitive in everything. And even after he came out of his latest health issue with the 6-hour open heart surgery, he had 3 months off the golf, and he came back and he said, "Oh, it's swinging all right, it's not hurting, everything feels all right." And about a month later, he won the monthly medal at the golf club, which was quite amazing, you know. It was a sensational thing that he did, coming back as he did, and we all thought that his health was so good, he was looking terrific, and then we got the crushing news in his latest. You know, losing Todd was just unbelievable.
Ever a tantrum? Do you ever see, every bloke who plays regular golf throws a tantrum occasionally?
I never saw him really angry, but on a couple of occasions when he full putted. And he did that for quite a while. His putting wasn't the strength in his game. He did fall putt on a number of occasions. He did lose it.
Never broke a utensil at any time?
I did see him just swing the club in anger, but nothing serious. He was very even-tempered, sure.
How should we remember him, Viney? The speakers have all been brilliant today. We'll talk about, I think, it's almost become incidental of how good a player he was because he was such a good player.
Look, he's my hero, Mike, not because of his football, but because of how he was as a person. He's just a magnificent human being. And he just embraced everybody. He had time for everybody. And a couple of times, even when we were playing golf, Philip wasn't there one Saturday. I said, "What's happened to Philip? Where is he today?" Told me, "Well, he's gone. He had to give another ball somewhere." He would never say no. He would never say no to talk. And Stan would say, "Well, the souls of no-dos have gone up this way." He's only had one speech. So everyone wanted to be buying the no-dos.
But you're right about that. The prostate push went. And I think Robbie Flower single-handedly has saved hundreds of lives of Victorian men with his preparedness to talk openly about what his prostate cancer. And then I did a story with him in the Herald Sun where he talked about it. And the Anti-Cancer Council said to me the following week they normally have 30 calls a week and they had 1,000. And so that was what he was prepared to do. And then every time someone was burning, he said, someone would ring. He'd just say yes.
You prompted him to have the prostate check.
And one of my kids was had an issue of some significance a couple of years ago. Not only did he ring her, he rang me and he asked permission to ring her because he was very good with Kate. And he rang me. Come on, look after me.
Hey, I've tried plenty of tears. I'm trying to be stronger. We've shed plenty of tears over the last 10 days for Jules, don't worry.
But he rang and he talked to her and he talked to her again. And he just kept doing that because that's the sort of giving person that he was.
He was, Michael, there's no doubt about that. He's probably the best person I've ever met.
Now, there's a couple of heavy hitters in this room today. Mrs. Fitzpatrick involved and Evans, will throw him in. And there'll be some MCG heavyweights here. Big ground, this room for a lot of statues, but
we lit up this place, didn't we? We can't have a statue here of Robbie Flower. There's something wrong.
Good boy, good boy. I think that's on record. I can't think of a better way to finish, Ben. I know you loved him, we all did, and we're thinking of you because we are the Flower and Drew fans.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Nick. Bloody hell, I knew I should have gone first. Very good, Tom. Get us underway. Firstly, to Cherie and to Tom and Jim and kids, to the Flower family, it's a great honour and privilege to be able to get up today and talk on behalf of the Melbourne Football Club and share some personal experiences that I've shared with Robbie. Over a period of time since Robbie's passing, I kept on dwelling in my mind and losing a lot of sleep about, what were the things that made Robbie so great. In your books that you've got in your hands that you've picked up, outlines his playing career and his statistical impact on the game. And for me, that's only half the story, quarter of the story. It's in fact my record's nearly as good, but I don't think I'm going to pack out the MCC and the members' dining room. So what is it that has brought all you people here today? How has Robbie touched you guys? And certainly for me, if I think about all the most valuable things in the world, they're the things you can't replace. And for me, Robbie was unreplaceable. The things he could do on the football field, certainly no one played like that then. Who plays like him now? And I'm sure there's no one in the future that are going to play like Robbie. So he was definitely unique and a one-off. You can't replace Robbie Flower. If I think I come from a tennis background. I think of Robbie in football terms. People just love Robbie. He played differently. There was never a bad word spoken about him by opposition supporters, by opposition players. They just loved him. If I think about other unique sporting heroes, I think of Roger Federer. When you talk tennis, people say no one plays like Federer. He's got such grace. His movement, like Robbie's, was just so unpredictable. He makes the game look slow, as Robbie did. Some of the situations Robbie got himself out of when he was playing, it should have been a contested ball situation. Somehow with his movement, it turned into uncontested possessions. So there's a uniqueness, and I think of Federer as a one-off, and Robbie was that from a footy perspective. Over these sleepless nights, I've also sort of dwelled back and, what else? His nickname was Tulip, for obvious reasons. But when I think about the way he played, I think surely we could have come up with something better than that. You know, I think Sean Burgoyne from Port Adelaide and Hawthorn, his nickname is Silk. And then I started thinking, well, what's smoother than Silk? Because that should have been Robbie's nickname. He was nearly the most competitive person I ever came across, and there's a lot of people in this room that played a lot more football with Robbie than I did, but in my 1 year and in 30 years since, I've never met a more competitive person. We'd often talk about, in that period of time, Robbie, from 1973 to 1987, up until that fateful year that we spoke about just before, you hadn't played in finals, and for such a competitive person, how did that affect you? And as a sign of the person he said, I don't feel shortchanged one bit. Every game I went out to play with my teammates, I thought we were going to win. He loved his individual challenges of playing on some of the greats. You know, he used to talk about the great clashes with Shimmer and Keith Gregg and Dougie Hawkins, who I see here, and probably later in the career, Dipper. But he loved those challenges. But every game he went out, he thought the team was going to win. He loved playing with Big Carl Dietrich. He said that he always felt like he walked a lot taller with Carl running around. I'm sure he would have preferred Carl as the bouncer at that party rather than himself. He loved playing for the Big V. You know, without the opportunity to play in final series, he loved playing for the Big V. The challenge, the best against the best. And this is where he shone. This is where a national audience, and the first time I saw Robbie Flower play, because Melbourne wasn't on too many match of the days back in the day when I was living in South Australia, it was watching those Big V clashes that I first saw Robbie Flower, and saw him, and from a national audience point of view, saw how much of a champion he was. He loved playing, you know, in the Australian teams, and he first met his great mate Bernie Quinlan on one of those teams, the Australian teams that have gone away to play the Irish footy. And it was no coincidence that, speaking to Barry Connolly and Chris Connolly, the story is passed down that he seemed to kick the ball better than the Irish. Such was his skill level, but he loved that atmosphere of the best against the best. He never felt shortchanged, as I said, because he was living the dream. He barracked as a young kid for the Melbourne Football Club. As Tom spoke about, he played with the Force. So he didn't need to win. He couldn't have been any happier. He was living his dream. 1987 was the first year that I played with Robbie, and my only year, my first, his last. But I actually met him in 1985. The Melbourne Football Club were trying to recruit me at the time, and I'd only met Cameron Schwab from the Melbourne Football Club as the recruiting officer, and he thought it'd be a good idea to come over and spend a weekend with Robbie Flower. So I was expecting to fly over to be picked up by Cameron, and I was met at the Melbourne airport by Robbie and his young son Brad, who was sitting in the back seat in his baby capsule. I couldn't believe Robbie Flower had come to pick me up. I was a pretty green, naive South Australian that only played 1 year of football after a tennis background, and I knew the presence that I was in, and I was very nervous. But by the time we got back to his humble abode in Croydon with a tennis court and swimming pool and 10 acres, I was in awe. You know, he just had that unique ability to make everyone feel at ease. You know, apart from Brad crying for the first part of that trip, you know, by the time he got back, you know, I just felt like I'd known him forever. And we formed a very special bond from that weekend. The next morning, after getting back, it was late, went to bed, got up, and Kim was up making a bit of breakfast, and I had some cornflakes. And after, you know, a couple of minutes eating breakfast, Robbie came out, and he had on this camel-coloured safari suit with his big glasses, Coke bottle glasses, that he picked up from the op shop probably a month early for $2. And he was just waiting to see the response on my face. So there's some common themes, isn't there? Like the practical joker, from the day one, he picked me up, First morning, he decided to try one on and wear the safari suit out. I went to work with him at the Forest Hill sports store, and I don't know if he made any money. I don't know how successful he was with his sports stores, though he must have done something right, because by the end he had over 100. But the amount of people that came in to talk to Robbie and get autographs, they never bought anything. But he always had time for people. He never begrudged people coming up and saying g'day. He had the common touch, there's no doubt. As good as, and nearly as good as he was with all that, you know, by the time I'd left after that weekend, spending that weekend with Robbie, I was never going to play anywhere else apart from the Melbourne Footy Club. Such was the impact that he had on me in that short period of time. That's, for me, that's greatness. That's why he's touched not only me, but obviously you people in the room too. It's just there was something special about him. I had the opportunity to go to Essendon and just won back-to-back flags, and I chose Melbourne, who hadn't played in finals for 20 years and was sitting second bottom. Such was the impact that Robbie had on me. I think for Robbie, you know, he loved his time at the Melbourne Footy Club. And in 1986, although he hadn't played in finals, the footy club ran a campaign to, you know, give Robbie one last chance, trying to raise some money for some recruits so that we could get Robbie into the finals one last time. That happened to be my first year, as I mentioned before, and it was probably in my 13 years of representing the football club, my most powerful memory. And it was really only because of, you know, trying to do it for Rob. You know, we started off pretty scratchy, but we had a young team, inexperienced team, a couple of old heads like Robbie and Brian Wilson, but we were a pretty young, inexperienced team, led by John Northey as the coach, Robbie as captain. We got to the middle of the year and we were around the mark, but for the last part of the year, we had to win the last 6 games to make the finals. And one by one, we knocked them off, and it culminated with that game at the Western Oval. On that day, you know, there's 33,000 people at the Western Oval, and Essendon are playing Collingwood here at the MCG. There was only 30,000 here and 33,000 at Witten Oval. Such was the impact. Now, Melbourne hadn't played in the finals for 23 years, but there wasn't that. It was Robbie Flower's last year. So I'm sure everyone was there in that game. We were there, and Robbie managed to kick 3 goals and get us over the line. And as I'm running off, you know, the look of Robbie's joy in his face, and then in the rooms afterwards singing the club song was something that stuck with me forever. We went on to play here the following week in an elimination final. We smashed the Kangaroos. We then beat the Swans, and we went out to play Hawks out at VFL Park. 3/4 time, we're about to leave the huddle, and I looked at Rob and I'm thinking the fairy tale is going to continue. Robbie's going to play in a grand final in his last year, and for the rest of us, we're going to play in a grand final, the first one since 1964. As we all know, the fairy tale didn't eventuate, and not many do, but for Robbie, that last year, and for me as a young kid and an old man now, that was the most memorable year because we got Robbie into the finals, and he got to experience those finals experiences. Only about a month ago, there was a replay on Foxtel, and it was the semi-final against Sydney, and the final siren rang. I was watching it, and then the phone rang, and it was Robbie, and he said, "How good was that?" How did he know I was watching that? And he said, "And what about your shorts? How tight were they?" He was special, Robbie. The player was obviously special, but the person was even more special. You know, the humbleness, the humility, the most modest champion I've ever come across. His loyalty to this club and to his mates could never be questioned. Those were the real things that made him such a fantastic person. You know, he was the life of the party. He was a great entertainer. He was a great storyteller. He just loved having a good time. Not many of us were part of the Melbourne Football Club, which is the oldest club in the land, and his record speaks for itself. There's been some great players along the way, and there's some that will go down as part of folklore, as part of legend. And that doesn't happen to very many people. You know, there's going to be a few, you know, the Norm Smith, the greatest coach, the great teams of the 50s and 60s, they'll be part of folklore. Ron Barassi sitting over here, his impact on the club. And the story of Jimmy Steins and Robbie. The story that I'll be passing on as part of that folklore that I'll be passing on to my children is the following. Robbie Flower was a champion of the Melbourne Football Club. He played with Coke bottle glasses when he started with the Melbourne Force. He had to buy a ticket to his first game because he didn't have a ticket, and the guy on the gate didn't let him in because he didn't believe he was a player. He weighed only 68 kilograms when he played his first game as a 17-year-old and only weighed 71 at the end. That's not quite true, but it's legend. You pass on not all the truths. He was arguably our greatest player, but he couldn't do one dip or bench press his own body weight, a record that stands today. Although he was only light-framed, he shouldered the enormous weight of hope and expectation of the Melbourne fans during his 15-year career. People came in droves to watch him play. No one could tackle him. It was like he had a force field around him. He just floated across the ground. The most skillful and artistic player of his time. So I'll be passing that down, and I'm sure that will pass from my family's generations to generations. To Tom and Jim, thanks for all those games of footy in the backyard. To hone his skills. To Kim and your family for being with him through all that career, was fantastic. To Cherie, you know, for the 23 years of marriage after footy, and to get him through these last 10 or so years where he's been really sick. To Brad, Danielle, Emily, Michaela, grandkids Ava, Jet and Jeffin, your dad and your pa, your husband was a great man. He's touched a lot of people in ways you'll never believe. He'll be sorely missed. Rest in peace, Rob.
To start off by saying how honoured I am to be standing here today as a representative of the family at this service. I know Nick mentioned his family, but I'm going to say I'm standing on their behalf. His loving wife Cherie, his children Brad, Danielle, Emily and Michaela, his adored grandchildren Jevon, Jet and Ava, my brother Jim and the extended Flower family, and of course Kim, the extended Drew family. I'd also like to make special mention of our parents, Joan and Alan, who are no longer with us. But I know they will have reunited with Rob and having a wonderful time catching up on all things life and family. I reckon Dad would have met Bob at the pearly gates with a couple of bottles of Abbott's. And I reckon Mum would have been out the back preparing a lovely meal. Most likely a schnitzel with chips and salad. Looking around the room, I am truly honoured to be speaking on behalf of the family, and we have been touched by the number of messages of sympathy, tributes, condolences that we have received, and I'd truly like to thank everybody who has been involved in that. I know there are a lot of football fans who probably don't know Rob, and I know they're at the back there giving their tributes as well. It's interesting, when you grow up as the brother of a champion footballer, you don't really see him that way. He's your brother, you do things together. And some of the tributes that were raised were quite touching. There's one word that really grabbed me, and that was hero. made me curious. I'm thinking, how can he be a hero to everybody? My boyhood hero, my childhood hero, my family hero. He was everybody's hero. And I looked up in the dictionary just the other day just to clarify, and I quote from the dictionary, hero, a man of distinguished courage or ability, admired for his brave deeds and noble qualities. Someone who is regarded as a model or ideal. And that pretty well sums it up. He was a hero to many and loved by all. It's also a privilege to be standing here at the MCG, at the place he made his own. And as Nick mentioned, that wing out there will never be the same. Not only did he make it his own, he almost called it his own. His home, for about 14 years or 15 years whilst he was a distinguished player for the Melbourne Football Club. And just before I get into what I'd like to say, I'd just also like to make mention of the Melbourne Football Club, the Melbourne Cricket Club, who've made the MCG available today and have helped us out so terrifically for this function. I'm going to just present a short, sharp snapshot of his life for the people who probably would be interested to understand how we grew up and that sort of thing, and my fellow speakers will bring you various stories and tales of Rob's adventures as he grew older. Robert Allen Flower was born on the 5th of August 1955 in Regent, Victoria, the second of three sons to Joan and Alan. The boys were christened James, Robert and Thomas, but were only ever known as Jim, Bob and Tom. Mum always used to joke that if nothing else, we'd at least be able to spell our names. I reckon she shouldn't have worried, because I reckon when we reached grade 6 we had them all covered. Accordingly to the family, he was ever only known as Bob. When he started playing football in 1973, he became Robert Flower. How that came, I don't know, but we didn't know who he was. In Mum's eyes, the boys could do no wrong, but we do suspect that a little boy Bob may have been the apple of her eye. Our family grew up in Omama Road, Murrumbina, and all went to Murrumbina Primary School, just 400 metres up the road. Back then, life was pretty simple and uncomplicated. We'd walk to school in the morning, play some footy before school, and at lunchtime, then come home and play footy in the backyard after school. Life was very simple back then. We even used to go to Rosebud for all of our holidays. We were fortunate to have a fairly big backyard, and this set the scene for many a sporting battle over the years. Even early on, Bob's football ability, in fact his entire sporting ability, was shining through. To make our backyard contest more even, I would have to recruit our next door neighbour, Pete Davies, to take him on. It would be 2-on-1. It always seemed that it was the one who managed to win every contest. We used to think it was unfair and tell him so, because he was bigger than us. But I suppose that doesn't say much for our physique, does it? Another story about our backyard tales was regaled by my brother Jim when he came over from Los Angeles, where he now lives. He remembered the day that we were playing footy in the backyard. We used to kick the footy over the house. One would be in the front yard, one would be in the backyard, and it's coming. And you'd have to wander and hopefully it'd come over. Anyway, Mum and Dad had gone out and left the three boys in charge, which again is another reflection on the simplicity of life back then. And we're having a kick around, and Jim put the footy straight through the lead light window at the front of the house. What are we going to do? Well, if we shut the blinds and don't say a word, they won't even notice it. Okay, that was the story. Mum and Dad came home. Bob came running out. Jim kicked the footy through the window. I was the littlest one there, so I know I wasn't involved. So I'm not really sure of the punishment then, but I'm sure Mum and Dad wouldn't have worried too much. It was interesting, as we were kids, Rob and I shared a room. We slept together for all those years until he left home. And it was interesting because I regaled this earlier, that we went away quite a few times together, and we'd always share a room. We'd have the same bed. When we were kids, we'd sleep in the room together and we'd regale all the footy numbers. Back in those days, in the late 60s, early 70s, I reckon we could sit down and tell you every footballer who played, what number they were, whether they had a beard, moustache, or whatever it might have been. We'd always go away, and if we were in the same room, we'd always go back to our old days where we'd talk about the numbers. was also interesting because Rob's got a house down in Sorrento, and just only a few weeks ago, he and I went down together. We had a golfing weekend, so just the two of us, and we stayed in the house. That room's got about 10 bedrooms. The main bedroom has 2 double beds in it. Don't know why, I must admit. But that room did have a funny old name, was nicknamed Swingers. I won't go into why. But suffice to say, our old habits didn't break us. I went and slept in the same room. He was in one bed, incidentally, I was in the other. But we were there regaling old stories, and I found that quite ironic that they were the old habits we'd go back into. As we grew older, we went to Murrumbeena High School. This was further away, so we'd ride our bikes to school every day. Our brother Jim was a bit older, so he tended to go with his mates, but Bob and I seemed to ride together. No helmets, no bike lanes, no nothing, just straight up the busy Murrumbeena Road. During high school, even Bob would agree, the schoolwork wasn't his greatest strength. His love and ability for football was becoming more and more evident. In fact, in an unusual twist, I reckon he would have been a prime candidate for Cedar, the company he helped form some 40 years later, and his colleague from Cedar, Chris Reedy, will tell you a little bit about that later. In the early days, Bob played junior footy for Murrumbeena Districts, a junior football club in the area. At the age of 15, he was invited to play for the Melbourne Fourths, an under-17 team located up the road in East Bentley. After quite a few hiccups, including having to stand out of football for 12 months and run the boundary for the Melbourne Fourths, he finally got to play for his beloved Melbourne Football Club, the Melbourne Fourths at that. His rise then became quite meteoric. In the course of one season, he progressed through the ranks of fourths, thirds and seconds to finally playing the seniors by round 10 in 1973 as a 17-year-old schoolboy. I vividly remember that day against Geelong. Mum and Dad and I were so proud as we took our seats in the official football enclosure in the MCG stands. 2 debutants played that day, Glenn Swan and Robbie Flower, a couple of very pretty names indeed. He immediately became a permanent fixture in that side for over 14 years, so much so that he never played in the seconds again. It was not long after this that he met and married Kim. Their marriage produced 2 loving children, Brad and Danielle, who are of course with us here today. His business interests were also starting to develop at this time, and he had some sports stores at Forest Hill, Knox and Eastland, which were rapidly growing. In conjunction with a group of other sports store owners, they formed a large sporting conglomerate called Sportsco. This became a very successful franchising organisation, and by the time it was sold some 20 years later, they had over 100 stores spread across the country. Very successful indeed. His football career was continuing to blossom, and by now he was a preeminent player in the VFL. He had captained the Melbourne Football Club and had also captained Victoria. We're also very proud of him. He was a very humble champion in those days. Not long after, he met Cherie and eventually married her in 1991. This union has produced 2 more loving children, Emily and Michaela, who are also with us here today. When his football career finished in 1987, he had a lot more time to focus on his family, and this is where he really shone through. It was also in 1995, though, that he found his second great love in life. He purchased his sprawling holiday home in Sorrento. I remember when he bought it, Mum was still alive, and she went down to help him make up all the beds. She came back and wow, she thought it was a hotel. There was bedding for 20 plus people, and so that's what it eventually became, a form of free hotel for everybody and anybody who'd like to come down and visit. Bob loved that place. I'm sure a number of people in this room have a number of stories to tell about it. We'll certainly fondly regale about some of those stories as we speak later today. Life was progressing beautifully for Bob at this stage until he encountered a few major health scares over the last 15 years or so. It did set him back a little. At the age of 45, he developed prostate cancer. Luckily, this was detected early, and he managed to overcome that to get himself back to full health fairly quickly. Then, in his early 50s, he developed cardiomyopathy, a heart disease that had impacted his ability to remain fully active. Again, he fought this disease and managed to play his regular games of golf with myself and our great mates Stan and Birdie. Unfortunately, he did have to curtail his love for tennis, which he was playing at quite a high standard at that stage. It was also around about this time that he and 3 of his colleagues conceived and formed Cedar Group, an educational organisation providing alternate schooling options for kids who are disillusioned with traditional avenues of schooling. They have now built that company into a very successful organisation, employing over 150 staff and over 2,000 students. This is in no small part due to Bob's drive and expertise. Bob was the ultimate entertainer. He loved nothing more than having a group of people down to Sorrento for a barbecue or whatever. In fact, the more the merrier. A standard night usually consisted of plenty of food, drinks, music, more drinks and frivolity. However, if the wigs came out down at Sorrento, you could be rest assured there was going to be a big one. He loved nothing more than dressing up all these guests in the wigs, and the merriment went even further. More recently in life, Rob's son Brad came home from Canada after spending some 9 years over there. He brought his partner Amanda and children Jevon and Jet to be closer to their father and pa. This proved to be a great fill-up for Bob, as he was so proud to have all his family back home and around him, the things he cherished most in life. However, it was the birth of his adored little granddaughter Ava, affectionately known as Little Bushy, in 2012 that really sparked up his life. Michaela and Ava live at home, and that beautiful little girl gave him so much joy over the past 2 years. She really could do no wrong in his eyes. It was early this year that Bob then had to overcome another serious health setback. During his regular checkup for his cardiomyopathy, the doctors detected an aneurysm on his aorta in the heart, and he had to endure serious open heart surgery in March of this year. He bounced back to full health much more quickly than anticipated, mainly due to his mental willpower and the loving support of his family and friends. In fact, he bounced back so well that over recent months we all felt that his health was as good as it had been for a long time. We all admitted that he looked as good as we have ever seen him. He was happy, settled and contented with his life. The tragic events of the last week have left us all shocked and with a huge hole in our hearts. He was an outstanding individual who touched the lives of so many. Whether it be in football, business, socially or family, he had time for everybody. As I mentioned earlier, we were going through some of the tributes and so forth, and many words were used to describe him. I'd just like to list a few of the words that have been used to describe him over this past week or so and try and put some of them into perspective for everybody. Humility, humble, or as Bernie would joke, we were trying to say humility one day and Bob came out with humbleness. Bernie, ever the wordsmith, used to play on that one all the time. Humility or humble. He was a very modest champion. He would often be stopped in the street or at the footy, and people seemed to be almost in awe of him. He would always stop and have a chat. They would ask him questions, he'd ask them a question about how they were. He would send them on their way with an autograph or pat on the head. They would love it so much. I was talking to his great friend Patrick the other night, and he once asked Rob how he managed to be so tolerant and friendly with everybody who he met. His response was typical of the man. He treated everybody as an equal and to give them the respect they deserve. Very humble indeed he was. Selfless was another word used to describe him. Just before Bob's open heart surgery this year, a good friend of ours, Ross, was having his own battle with cancer. It didn't look good for Ross. Virtually immediately after his surgery, even prior to worrying about himself, he was still in hospital and he made a call to our good mate to inquire about the health of our mate Ross. Sadly, it wasn't good news, and Ross has since passed away not long after. It shows how selfless a man he was. Generous. both with his time and money. He would forever be guest speaker at various organisations and enthrall them with his many anecdotes. Most recently, he was invited to be guest speaker at the Premiership Presidents Club by his good friend Andrew Newbold. He admitted he was a bit nervous going to that, speaking in front of so many luminaries. But later, he admitted he had a wonderful time. As a matter of fact, I did hear in a tribute, Eddie Maguire on the radio was talking about that very outing, and he was very complimentary about the speech that Robert made on that day. He was also very generous with his hospitality, Sorrento being the prime example. Anybody could come and stay, it didn't matter who, friend of a friend, anybody. He would treat them like kings whilst they were there. Practical joker is another term that has been used, and all those that knew him very well would know and love him for his practical jokes. Most recently, he managed to get me one last time. Wasn't long ago. Earlier this year, my wife went to China with two of her friends and managed to lose a purse within 24 hours. This was the subject of a great deal of mirth at the time. We got through that okay, and then only 2 or 3 weeks ago I received a phone call at home. I answered it. Hello? He goes, hello, Mr. Flower. Yes, that's right. Ah, your wife lose her purse in China. I go, yes, that's right, yes. Ah, we think we found it. I said, oh, who is speaking? He goes, oh, Mr. Wong. It was that time I sort of realised who it was, but one last time he did get me. There are a number of practical jokes, but whenever he used to tell them, the best one that he loved was the one he got when he was back in his Forest Hill days. They had a jeweller across the road, and they used to play practical jokes. Him and his partner Rob used to play jokes on Con across the road, the jeweller. Con's greatest love was to just pinch clothes off the rack out the front, take them all home, bundle them up and send them back to them a couple of weeks later, saying you better watch your stock. So they thought, we'll get him. One day, and the East Stand, I think it was Forest Hill actually, they had a variety of sporting items, and one of them being a starter's pistol, which was quite loud. So one day they watched Con leave the shop. He was going to get his cup of coffee. So Rob jumped into opened the thing, back into the back room and said, now Rob, when he comes in, you ring his phone. There's Rob sitting there with a balaclava on and the starter's pistol. Con comes in the front door, opens it up. Chad or Rob, his partner, rings the phone. Con rushes back to answer it. There, sitting at the desk, is Rob. I gotcha! Bang! The bloke went back, the coffee went up on the roof, he lied down, and he admitted later he thought he was dead. Once the balaclava came off, they got together and he thought it was the greatest joke he's ever seen. I'm sure a number of us here have been they're on the receiving end of some of his practical jokes, but we all loved him for it. Lastly, family patriarch. I mentioned he loved nothing more than his family, and he really did. He loved them all. He loved nothing more than gathering together for parties, barbecues, impromptu gatherings, anything at all. He really was in his element when he was with his family. We're all going to miss him greatly. On a personal level, I really am at a loss of words as to what to say. He loved me, respected me, and encouraged me. He loved my wife Kay and our daughter Rhiannon. Cherie, I know you won't believe this, I even reckon I saw him give our dog Alfie a pat one day. I've lost not only my best mate, my brother and confidant, but I've lost my hero. I've come to understand that he was my hero in life. I love you, mate, and will miss you sorely. As Cherie has lovingly noted, our world will never be the same. Thank you.